PA Books is a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to the PA Books Podcast. I'm Phil Beckman. PA Books features interviews on Pennsylvania history, culture, and people. In this episode, we talk with Joseph Michael Boslet about his book, Little Round Top at Gettysburg.
This week on PA Books, Joseph Boslet, author of Little Round Top at Gettysburg.
Joseph Michael Boslet is the author of Little Round Top at Gettysburg, a reassessment of July 2nd, 1863. Take us back to the morning. The sun is rising on July 2nd. Where are the troops located?
Where are the troops located? I think Meade was trying to find that out too. And Lee wasn't quite sure where everybody was either. The troops that I was concerned with, the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Division of the 5th Army Corps, they were somewhere up around Powers Hill, up around Culp's Hill, before they got their call to head down south to Little Round Top later on as a result of Daniel Sykes's move out to the Wheatfield Road. The Confederates, mostly along Seminary Ridge. The Union Army, as Meade had placed them on the night of the 1st, along Cemetery Ridge, East Cemetery Hill, and some troops on Culp's Hill.
So there had been fighting on July 1st, and that would set up July 2nd. What was Lee's plan?
Lee's plan was to try to, and Lee did this in most of his battles, was always trying to flank the enemy. And he had tried earlier with Ewell on his left flank on Culp's Hill, East Cemetery Hill, but they weren't quite ready for any kind of combat there. So he started to look south, down around Warfield Ridge over toward the Round Tops to possibly flank there, but Longstreet's troops weren't in position yet, so he wasn't quite ready for that, for prime time there either, although he had sent one of his aides out, Captain Johnson, to do a reconnaissance. And there have been a lot of questions about Captain Johnson's reconnaissance. Although personally I feel he didn't do a bad job, but then people were trying to work with information that was 8 hours old. And me being an intelligence guy in Vietnam, information 8 hours old is not going to help anybody.
Now, Little Round Top is not only a distinctive geographic feature, but it has gotten a lot of attention in movies and in fiction. What drew you to Little Round Top?
I've been interested in the Civil War since I had an 8th grade field trip there when I was 12 years old. The fascination was all of the troops, the kinds of movements, the decisions that the generals made, the terrain, and that's one thing I've always been interested in is maps and terrain. And Gettysburg is fascinating because it has such a variety of terrain. Studying that terrain is one of the main objects of staff rides that are done out of the Army War College in Carlisle. I'm a volunteer down there with the Army Heritage Center. And I have gone along on some of those staff rides, and it's interesting how they take terrain that was fought over in 1863 and bring it forward to today to teach soldiers how to conduct combat operations in not just that kind of terrain, but other kind of terrain as well.
Let's talk more about the terrain aspect of it. Kind of describe Little Round Top, Big Round Top, and the surrounding area.
Little Round Top is described by the soldiers themselves as a bread loaf-shaped hill from north to south axis. Not by Pennsylvania standards, it's a hill. It's not a mountain. Although some Confederates, when they started to climb it during combat, talked about it being a hill or a mountain. Big Round Top's about 100 feet higher, conical in shape. But the difference between the two is Big Round Top is totally tree covered. Little Round Top, the west face, was cleared off logging operations in the year or so before. The surrounding terrain was mostly agricultural fields, although walking a lot of those fields, they were in fallow more than they were in grain. Some talk about like Antietam soldiers having to fight through the corn. Well, there was no corn that they had to fight through on their way to the Little Round Top on either side, either east or west. Most of the fields were in grasses or fodder for their livestock. In fact, what's interesting about livestock, they free-ranged, grazed over most of those hills. In fact, the undergrowth, there was very little left there when the soldiers took positions because the animals had eaten all of the undergrowth. Similar to what the forests in Germany, but they have individuals that clear those out, not animals. But today, when people go to visit the battlefield, it's hard to visualize that because the undergrowth is there. The Park Service has not been able to keep after the maintenance of that undergrowth to have it look like it was during the battle. So when you do battle walks with individuals, you have to explain to them that they could see some distance underneath the trees because there was no bushes and no other grasses or any other kind of greenery.
How many Union troops were on Little Round Top early on July 2nd?
Initially with Strong Vincent's brigade, and Strong Vincent was from Erie. Some writers credit him with going to West Point, but he never quite got there. He went to Harvard, though, and did very well, and a very intelligent person. He had about 1,335 troops with him, and then he picked up some 2nd U.S. sharpshooters who were chased back across farmer fields into his position. And a lot of writers don't talk about this, but Vincent had somewhere between 40 and 50 U.S. sharpshooters with his unit while they were fighting. Now, that in itself, people don't think too much of it. But U.S. sharpshooters had a Sharps rifle, 52 caliber. The standard Union arm was a rifled musket that could fire, they said, 3 rounds a minute, which is baloney because I've fired one. It's about 1 round a minute. The Sharps rifles, they could fire anywhere from 6 to 8 rounds a minute. So you tell me what the difference in firepower and the impact of it is. Later, he picked up troops from the 140th New York and the rest of Stephen Weed's brigade, which added about another 1,300 to 1,400, but they were not involved in combat. Only one of their regiments, the 140th New York, which was about 400 people. So total fighting force on Little Round Top for the Union was about 1850. The Confederates, they started out with somewhere around 1,800 and ended up with supports that they got from the 4th and 5th Texas, which was from another brigade, Robertson's brigade, totaled somewhere around 2,300. The numbers don't look very big, Phil, but when you look at the lethality of the combat, it was every bit as tough, every bit as combat was every bit as savage as it was at any other part of the battlefield. In fact, it was slightly more, and a lot of people think, combat is combat. It's not. Some places it's pretty savage and it's pretty tough, and these soldiers put up with it. One point I need to make, you may cover this later on, but people don't realize the Confederates from Law's brigade marched 26 miles to get to the battlefield that morning on July 2nd from over near Shippensburg. not enough water, not enough food, not enough rest. Got to the battlefield, basically played out. And then because of mix-up in some orders and issues with Johnson's reconnaissance, did some backtracking on marching and added about another 4 to 6 miles even before they got to Little Round Top. And I marched 12 miles in a day when I was in the Army in basic. And believe me, with full pack, and that was enough. These soldiers, I'm amazed, and I talk about this in the book, I'm amazed how well they could handle this, and they did. And then fought combat, which is probably the utmost exertions that you can give as a human being fighting in combat, because you're fighting for your life. And then almost broke the Union line twice on Little Round Top. Fascinating testament to the Southern troops.
One of the key figures in this story is Gouverneur Warren. Who is he?
Gouverneur Warren was at Gettysburg, the chief engineer of the Army of Potomac, very good friend of George Meade. Later on, he ended up commanding the 5th Corps through the Overland Campaign. But Meade was using him as sort of a second opinion, using him to check out areas where Meade couldn't. And Meade was very active during the whole battle. A lot of people don't talk about that too much. But George Meade was moving around pretty much all the time, checking everything, just like we say in the Army, pass the responsibility on to some other people, but you better pay attention and check and make sure they get it done. Well, that's what Meade was using Gouverneur K. Warren to do. Ironically, Warren's dad was making cannon for the Union Army, and Warren was born right across the river, Hudson River, from West Point, New York, where Warren actually went to school. So Warren, Meade heard some, as he was doing some reconnaissance down around the southern part of the Union line, heard some noise up around the Round Tops, and he said to Warren, we'll go up there and check that out, and whatever needs to be taken care of, you do that. So Warren did. He went up to the top of Little Round Top, and the signal people were up there. And when Warren came up, they thought, okay, our job's done, and they started to leave. And Warren said, no, I need you to stay here. Keep waving the flags, because we want the Southerners to think we're still occupying this place. Meanwhile, he was trying to scout to see if the Confederates were making an effort to try to take the Round Tops. And as he did find out, not just from the signal people, but from a warning round out of one of the artillery pieces from Smith's artillery, that the Confederates were all lined up at Moorfield Ridge getting ready to assault the Round Tops. Warren's job was so critical through the whole process. People use the word savior of Little Round Top. He earned that. He did every bit of a job as Meade had assigned him to do. The only problem with Warren's position on Little Round Top, he didn't know that Strong Vincent was down at the other end of the hill. And there's some discussion about acoustic shadows. They're for real. I've been down there, and I've had people do different exercises. You stand on Warren's position, and Warren, by the way, unlike a statue, was not 7'4" tall. He was like 5'3". He was a short guy. And believe me, he was hiding behind the rocks because they were taking rounds from the Devil's Den area. But you go down to the other end, southern end of Little Round Top, where Vincent's position was, you can't hear anything. And you're only 200 yards away. Amazing when you see these kinds of anomalies, environmental anomalies happen.
So as Warren sees the Confederates getting ready to assault, what does he do? There are only signalmen on top of the mountain, on top of the hill. And at some point, he encounters Strong Vincent?
Good question. And this has been something authors have sort of missed for years. Vincent got himself up there on his own recognizance. people think Warren ordered him up there. Didn't happen. Warren sent his aides out, and one of his aides was Washington Roebling. Yes, the same Roebling that got involved in building the Brooklyn Bridge. His dad started it. He worked through most of it and then developed the caisson disease, the bends, and his wife, who was Warren's sister, finished it. Fascinating story. So Warren was sending aides out to get people, and one of the aides went to Sykes. And Sykes, who was a commander of the 5th Division, started looking for any of his brigades that he could get up there. And he already had 3 of his brigades in Barnes' division, of which Vincent's was one of them, committed to battle to support Dan Sickles and his extraordinary move out to Wheatfield Road, which was against orders. Anyway, Sykes's aide was running down the road on horseback on Wheatfield Road, and Vincent saw him running and stopped him on the road and said, "What are your orders?" He said, I'm to try to get a brigade up to Little Round Top. And Vincent said, "I will do it. I'll take care of it. I'll take the responsibility." So Sykes took credit for giving him orders to go to Little Round Top. Barnes, the division commander, took credit for giving Vincent orders to go to Little Round Top. And Warren took credit for giving Vincent orders to go to Little Round Top. And none of them gave him orders to go to Little Round Top. Vincent did it on his own recognizance. Fascinating.
So what units was Vincent in charge of?
Vincent had the 44th New York, the 83rd Pennsylvania, which was from Erie, the 16th Michigan, which was from around the Detroit area, and yes, Joshua Chamberlain and a 20th Maine. And everybody knows about them after looking at the Gettysburg movie and reading the Killer Angels book. And I don't discount those films and books, even though there's a lot of dramatic license. And it's a good place for a lot of people to start to get interested in the battle. And then we can work later, maybe correcting the story a little bit. But fascinating stories. But Joshua Chamberlain's role, I think, was a bit overstated in both the movie and the book. But again, dramatic license. And Chamberlain deserved all the credit that he got. But so did the other 3 regimental commanders. They did a heck of a job, too. And especially Jim Rice, who was the commander of the 44th New York, because when Vincent got mortally wounded, Rice took over the brigade, and they did not even miss a step. This was the finest example of succession of command in combat anywhere in the Civil War up to that point. And credit to Strong Vincent for how he trained his soldiers, how he worked with his commanders. They just stepped right into it and just kept on going without even missing a beat. Not every unit operated that way. In fact, the Confederates on their side, they had major command issues because they lost most of their commanders, their primary commanders. They were on 2nd and 3rd successions in some of their units. And in a combat situation, that is nearly impossible to maintain the continuity and the especially attacking effort. Now, it's a little easier to be on defense, but the Confederates' problem started right off the get-go when Hood, the division commander, got wounded in the Bushman Orchard just before they started to kick off and head across the fields toward the Plum Run Gorge, Devil's Den area, Slaughter Pen, and then on to the Round Tops.
How did Strong Vincent position his regiments on Little Round Top?
Good question, and fascinating, because most writers in the past, most map makers in the past, don't have the units in the right position. As Vincent brought his troops up, there was an order called by the file on the right, by the file by the right into line. With that order, there's only one way those troops could be placed on the south slope of Little Round Top. So they started in the order that they came from the wheat field area. They were along a stone wall in the wheat field, which is parallel to Crawford Avenue today. They were placed in position 44th New York. Down in front of the 44th New York was the 83rd Pennsylvania. Then next was the 20th Maine. And on the far left was the 16th Michigan. Everybody has that messed up. They have the 16th Michigan on the right to start. They weren't. They were on the left to start. Vincent, after he saw what was happening down in the valley, moved the 16th Michigan over to the right flank. Now, you asked me why the 83rd PA was in front of the 44th New York. Great question. And I would love to ask Strong Vincent why he did that. But I think I know why he did that. They were trying to solidify the defense in that saddle between Big Round Top and Little Round Top. And that's exactly where they were. Plus the fact that Vincent had the 83rd PA in this position before in the Battle of Gaines' Mill, in the Battle of 7 Days down in Virginia in 1862. There was a precedent for it, and nobody has mentioned that before, the precedent. Defense in depth, lots of rocks. Nobody was building stone walls like a lot of people think, not until the night of the 2nd into the 3rd. Chamberlain even asked one of the engineers, Emmer Cope, to put a sign up in front of his breastworks 20 years after the battle that we weren't fighting behind stone walls, because he didn't want his people embarrassed that they had to hide behind a stone wall to fight. Well, the Army soon got hang of how important it was fighting behind breastworks and stone wall. Just remind people about Culp's Hill on July 2nd and 3rd. But the placement of the units, there's a lot of talk about Chamberlain, Vincent telling him, hey, you're the left flank of the Army, you got to hold this at all hazards, yada, yada, yada. No, the 16th Michigan got that talk first. And then when Vincent saw what was going on down in the valley, he moved the 16th Michigan over to the right flank. Few people talk about this except my good friend, Jared Mike, who's a 16th Michigan fan. The 16th Michigan was one of the top fighting units in the Army of Potomac, even at that time at Gettysburg. They were short of some people because of combat at Chancellorsville. Vincent knew these people. He knew he could move them over there very quickly, which he had to do. So after he moved the 16th Michigan to the right flank, which is the position where their monument is today, below the castle or the 44th/12th New York monument. Everybody calls it the castle because it looks like a castle. And then as a result of that, Chamberlain and 20th Maine ended up on the right flank or left flank. So that's when Chamberlain got his, you have to hold this position at all hazards talk.
How long were Vincent's troops in position before the fighting began for them?
Good question. A lot of people say things happen right away. No. And I'm using narratives from Chamberlain and other individuals that were in line. Vincent actually got his troops there about 15 to 20 minutes before the Confederates' assault contacted the Union line. Chamberlain even had time to go visit with Jim Rice and go over and look down into the valley to see the troops coming up. And they had time to move the 16th Michigan from the left flank over to the right flank. And they also had time to send out skirmishers, which when units get in place, usually they send out skirmishers. They're sort of whiskers on the cat so you can feel, the enemy as they approach. Well, you're sitting on a little round top, you can see the enemy approaching. The skirmishers are not that critical, but they still set them out. And most of them, within about 5 minutes or so, started to move back toward their main lines. But a lot of writers talk about, it was instant. The contact was instant. No, it wasn't. The only unit that probably had somewhat instant contact was the 16th Michigan after they got moved from the left over to the right, because as soon as they got them placed on the right, they had contact with the 4th Texas.
Another unit involved in the fight that day was the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters. Where were they positioned?
Love those guys. A lot of people understate their impact on the battle. They actually were watching the left flank of Dan Sickles' 3rd Corps because he didn't have enough troops to cover his whole line. So he was using the sharpshooters to sort of give him as we called a warning line in Vietnam in our fire bases, where we'd put little tin cans with sea rat cans with little stones in them and hang them on the barbed wire. So if the bad guys hit them, they'd rattle. So that's what the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters were. But they just didn't run and gun. They held back most of Hood's division for a fair amount of time that Longstreet even credits them with saving the Battle of Gettysburg for the Union Army. The delay was of them working in 4-man teams, similar to what we work in the Army today, with 2 men holding, 2 men moving, 2 men that were moving, they hold, and then the other 2 move. Impressive. If you look at Field Manual 100 in the U.S. Army today, you will see exactly what the U.S. Sharpshooters were doing during the Civil War, described today as small infantry tactics. As the sharpshooters moved back toward the Round Tops, 3 companies headed toward Little Round Top and embedded themselves with both 83rd Pennsylvania, 44th New York, and 15 to 20 of them with one of Chamberlain's companies that he sent out for skirmishers. And they sat off to the side of the battle for most of the time until the very end, when they were making a grand assault up Big Round Top. They joined in the fray after that, but the 12 to 15 sharpshooters added to Morell's Company B added or made the unit about 55 to 60 people, which is a fair-sized unit to have on your flank. And this is what William Oates, the commander of the 15th Alabama, was having to deal with most of his time while he was banging against the 20th Maine on that left flank. And a lot of people don't realize that. Oates really did a good job. He was a good commander, although the Confederates didn't recognize him as such. Later on, they didn't give him a full promotion to colonel. He was a colonel in the militia. But I credit William Oates with doing a heck of a job. He wanted to stay on Big Round Top. That's where he originally went. He thought he could turn it into a Gibraltar and then hold that flank for the Confederates. Well, staff officer of General Law, his name was Lee, I think, told him, look, you got to get moving. That's what we're doing out here today. We're not digging in. We're attacking the Union Army. So moved him off of his position on Big Round Top. And when he was attacking Chamberlain's position on Little Round Top, supposedly the Confederates were signaling each other with whippoorwill calls, bird calls. I have this covered in my book under a note. The publisher didn't want me to put it mainstream, but it's a great story. Chamberlain was a birder. Chamberlain knew bird calls. Whippoorwills are nocturnal. Now, if you hear whippoorwill calls in the daytime, what are you thinking? And then I had a stupid question. our Alabama whippoorwill is the same as Pennsylvania whippoorwills, and there's a little bit of an accent in there somewhere. And then Chamberlain being from Maine, you got Maine whippoorwills, PA whippoorwills, and Alabama whippoorwill. But the other thing about animals, because I had this experience in Vietnam, and a lot of what I wrote about are experiences that I had too in Vietnam 160 some years later. When we did not hear any animal calls in the jungle, we knew the bad guys were around somewhere. So when you hear a lot of animal calls, generally you consider it pretty safe. Well, whippoorwills, if there's a lot of activity around the area, believe me, they're not calling either, and they're not there either. So this is something a soldier learns when you get out in the woods. The normal animal calls that you have, and if you don't hear them, get your guard up because something's about to happen.
We'll be back in a moment with the PA Books Podcast.
Enjoying this podcast? Please support PCN with a donation at pcntv.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Well, let's look at the different regiments and what kind of a fight they had. So you mentioned the 16th Michigan moved from the left flank to the right flank. What kind of fight did they have during the battle?
They had an absolute battle. The 83rd PA and 44th New York were solid in the middle. They were never really tested. They were attacked somewhere between 2 and 3 times, although some authors say 4 or 5, but not in the middle. It was 2 or 3. Chamberlain on the left flank, he was almost under continuous attack, although they say there were somewhere maybe 4 or 5 different pulses on the attack. The 16th Michigan got hammered pretty hard. They were hanging out there all by themselves, and they had their flank literally in the air, which meant their right flank, there was no support. They were not anchored on any terrain. They did not have any other troops there to support them. Plus, they were the smallest unit in the group, somewhere around 230 troops. There's some discussions about whether it's 220 or 230. It's like, come on, it's somewhere around 230. But they were being hit by 48th Alabama and the 4th Texas. And I calculated the numbers on the attack because nobody had done that before, because I'm thinking, okay, why were these guys under so much pressure? Well, you start to look at the numbers, and they may have been outnumbered as much as 3-1, which is a big number in attacking. Plus, the other thing, having your flank in the air, when you get a lot of pressure in the Civil War, they even do it today to some extent, they do what they call refuse their flank. They bring the 2 or 3 companies on that flank into a position 90 degrees to their main line, so they can give themselves a little bit more room for combat. Well, while the 16th Michigan was under this heavy pressure, nobody's talked about this enough. I feel Norval Welch, who was their commander, and he was a decent commander. He got killed in Petersburg near the end of the war, but one of the authors of Attack and Defense of Little Round Top, Norton, Oliver Norton, sort of beat him up a little bit in the beginning of his book, which is the Bible on the Battle of Little Round Top. But then later on, he sort of gives him back a little bit because Welch was a good commander. He wasn't somebody that would give up at the first sign of problems. But Welch, I believe, was in the process of refusing that flank when they got hit with pretty heavy attack pressure. And they broke. But reading narratives from other soldiers, and these are narratives that were issued fairly soon after the battle. We're not talking 20 or 25 years later, maybe 3 to 5 years after the war, said that the unit retired in order. And then a lot of people said, well, they just took off. They didn't take off. They went up behind the topographical crest of Little Round Top and waited there for a while to see what was going to happen. Meanwhile, the 140th New York, this is the big hero story of Little Round Top, the 140th New York with Patty O'Rourke coming in to save the day, literally. But Welch's people stayed behind Little Round Top until they saw Norton with the brigade flag running down the spine of Little Round Top to go get ambulances and more staff people to help with the wounded. And Welch thought they were retreating, so he followed him. So that's where a lot of the people think Welch just took off. Well, he didn't just take off, and then he joined the unit the next morning. But the story of the 140th New York, I'm sure you have a question about that, and I will save that for you because that is the big story of Little Round Top.
Well, I want to look at the other regiments first, and then we can get to that one.
Great.
So to the left of the 16th Michigan was the 44th New York. What was their fight like, and what units were opposite them?
44th New York was in line with the 16th Michigan and the 20th Maine. Down in front of the 44th New York was the 83rd Pennsylvania. Everybody has the 83rd PA in a linear formation with those other units. Did not happen. 83rd PA was down in front, just like I said earlier, precedent established for the disposition in 7 days battle. Now, how do I know the 83rd PA was down in front? Because everybody else has got them linear. If you go read the 83rd Pennsylvania Monument, the monument is sitting down the south slope of Little Round Top, some distance from the top. These monuments, and by the way, the monument weighs 40,000 pounds of granite. They're just not going to plop that anywhere. The soldiers have to approve it. Gettysburg Memorial Commission had to approve it. Three-member committee had to approve it. And then the big approval was John Batchelder, John Batchelder is Mr. Gettysburg Battlefield. So the monument was placed there. If you look on the bottom of the monument today, you go to Gettysburg, and it's open now because when they did the renovation, they cleared it all out that you can actually get to the monument now and read the bottom of it that says the 83rd Pennsylvania was in front of this monument. And people have been overlooking that, Phil, for years. I can't believe that after all the work that's been done on the history of it, that people were overlooking this, but they did. But anyway, we all stand on the shoulders of other authors. I'm not beating anybody up. I'm not trying to be a know-it-all. I just read stuff and study. And my training in military intelligence, you follow threads out to the end. And that's what I did with this. Followed the thread out. I tried to find out what's the criteria for placing monuments? Why were they down there? Reading the monument, whatever. The 44th New York, they and the 83rd PA had the fewer casualties of the four regiments that were in Vincent's brigade. The 16th Michigan took fairly heavy casualties, and the 20th Maine took fairly heavy casualties. Now, not unusually heavy for Gettysburg fighting, but the 16th Michigan was exposed the whole time they were in that position. 44th New York and the 83rd PA were undercover for most of the action, plus the units that were attacking them, which were 47th Alabama and the 5th Texas. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, 5th Texas. Had backed off some of their attacks. And as I said earlier, the middle part of the line only took about 2 or 3 really serious assaults. I have a timeline in my book about different units and times and how many attacks and so on and so forth to try to make it a little clearer on maybe actually what happened and summarize all the information from a variety of sources. But fighting is fighting. I mean, when people are shooting bullets at you, it's serious. I don't care if you're not taking a lot of casualties, you're still taking casualties. But those two units were the anchor in Vincent's line, and that's what he intended, for that middle of that line to be solid across the saddle of the slope. Oh, and by the way, the saddle between the two hills, everybody's looking at that today. Beautifully landscaped, beautifully contoured intersection. That intersection was probably 12 to 15 feet lower during the Civil War, using old maps. So people looking at that today don't realize that that terrain was more severe than what they see today. The position in the 83rd down the slope where their flank markers are actually had another little drop-off in front of it, about 10 to 12 feet. And also around Chamberlain's position, people walk around that monument and they look at, there's a little path down there that used to be a carriage road. And they discontinued that when they built the hard surface roads. But that road is somewhere about 4 to 5 feet higher than what it was during the battle. That drop-off on the 20th Maine's position is actually more severe than what it looks like today. And that's one of the things that I spent a lot of time studying the terrain and what it was like back in 1863. And it was different than what people are seeing today. Even Plum Run itself. With the beaver pond in there today, it's really hard to envision what that looked like during the battle. But the 4th Maine, who really gave good service that helped the fighting on Little Round Top, and most authors don't even talk about the 4th Maine. And Elijah Walker, he's one of my favorite guys, but he held that Plum Run area and pulled 2 units away from the Little Round Top fight for at least 20 minutes. That made a difference, because if they had had that other 20 minutes, they would have crushed the flank of the 16th Michigan, and that battle might have gone a different way. Although some people, revisionists, talk about, well, what if the Confederates would have taken Little Round Top? Well, that was rather moot. There was almost 18,000 Union troops within about 200 yards of that fighting. Do you think George Meade would have let the Confederates sit up there after they took it over? Heck no. George is the old fighting turtle. He wouldn't have given it up so easy.
So let's talk about the 20th Maine. They get a lot of the attention because of their position in the movies and so forth. But what was their fight really like on that day?
The 20th Maine, believe it or not, is one of my favorite units. I don't beat them up. I give them full credit with what they did, but I like to give everybody else credit too. Joshua Chamberlain was a special person. He was an educator, what some people call soft sciences. I have a few friends in the business that talk about engineering and science courses as hard science, but liberal arts and languages, that's considered soft sciences. But smart man, knew a lot of languages, no military training, on-the-job training. But he had some good teachers. Adelbert Ames, who was a general in the 11th Corps, schooled Joshua Chamberlain. A lot of people don't realize that relationship. Very critical. Again, Phil, you and I both know you never do stuff all by yourself. You get help, and you need help. But Chamberlain had about 340-some troops after Chancellorsville. They got beat up pretty good at Chancellorsville. A lot of time studying Gettysburg, you have to go back to Chancellorsville to find out why some things happened. The 2nd Maine was being disbanded. Their term was up. But 120 of those soldiers were fooled by the recruiter, and they thought they were only signing on for 2 years, and they were signed on for 3. So they weren't allowed to go home, and they were about ready to mutiny. So because they were another Maine unit, they asked Chamberlain if he could take over these 120 guys and bring them into his unit and try to work things out with them, which he did to his credit, because they were ready to tear the world apart and not in the right way. They were critical to him in defending that left flank. And there's a very famous painting by Dale Gallen, one of my favorite artists, showing Sergeant Tozier holding brigade flag and a rifle, defending Chamberlain's line on the left flank. And Tozier got the Medal of Honor for this. And what's ironic, Tozier was from this 2nd Maine unit that Chamberlain inherited. The Mainers were good fighters. They were seamen, they were loggers, they were tough people. Some of them were firefighters. But Chamberlain, in his own way, I don't know how he did it, but he got them all on the same page. And he got them all working together. And he had one of the best fighting units after Gettysburg. Up to Gettysburg, his unit was not really tested, proven yet. And they got so beat up at Chancellorsville that they really hadn't had a chance to develop a reputation. The other units, the 83rd PA, the 44th New York, and the 16th Michigan, had already proven themselves. This was Vincent's weak regiment. And Chamberlain trusted with defending the left flank, and he came through. And his troops did a magnificent job defending that flank. Some people talk about him being bent back like a hairpin. That's not exactly true either. And there's some stories about a rock that Oates's brother hid behind, and that one's not true either. But that's something to leave for the battlefield, because I like to leave that for a battle walk and point out that the rock wasn't big enough to hide behind, nor was it far enough out in the position that it could be used for any kind of defense.
So Vincent's Spur, where the 20th Maine was, you mentioned that it was much steeper than it is today.
Yeah.
Talk about it from the 15th Alabama's point of view as they're trying to assault up into this position.
I would like to rename that spur, by the way, Chamberlain's Spur, because he's the one that defended it, even though everybody still uses Vincent's Spur. The 15th Alabama, when William Oates come down the hill and saw what he was up against, he knew he was going to have a day of it, and not to mention the fact that he already had a heck of a day of it after marching all the way from Shippensburg over to Gettysburg. He first tried the front of the line, and the slope there, counting the difference in elevation with what it was during the battlefield or battle, almost vertical in some places. And I don't know how. Culp's Hill, they had the same kind of a situation. And Jones's people against General Greene on the upper part of Culp's Hill, it was literally vertical, 10 to 12 feet straight up. There were some places of Chamberlain's line that was 10 to 12 feet straight up. So you don't attack that too well. So his soldiers are combatants, experienced. They knew that they had to put down a fire, and then they would attack under that fire. They couldn't get close to the Union line enough to even change Chamberlain's formation. There's some talk of hand-to-hand. That only happened at the end, when Chamberlain got all his troops together and said, hey, I had enough of this stuff, let's go. And they did. They attacked. And that's where they had the hand-to-hand. There's some talk, soldiers talk about some of the hand-to-hand. There's very little hand-to-hand in the Civil War. I mean, they were shooting at each other for the most part, and very few bayonet wounds. People talk about the bayonet. The bayonet was more of a threat than actually something that happened. But Chamberlain fended off 4 to 5 definite attacks from Oates's troops. 15th Alabama, after trying the main part of the line, tried to flank it with 2 companies. And Chamberlain's officer on his left flank was Captain Spear, who wrote a autobiography after the war, and a very good one. In fact, this autobiography helped keep Chamberlain in truth, because Chamberlain, every time he told his story, it kept getting better. But Oates was an intelligence commander. He knew different tactics he could use, and he tried everything in his kit bag to break that line. And he nearly did, but not quite. But the last move that he made got him so exposed that when Chamberlain decided to attack, and he never did order charge, he did order bayonet. Chamberlain never ordered charge. And that's Chamberlain's own words out of his own book. Oates was pretty well spent, and he had tried pretty much everything in his kit bag to be able to break the line. But I think the fact that some people look at the numbers of Oates's troops in the 15th Alabama and the number of troops in Chamberlain's 20th Maine, Chamberlain thought he was outnumbered 2-1. There was even some number 10-1, but that was ridiculous. But 2-1, now that's understandable. When Oates started his movement toward Little Round Top, he did have 2-1 odds over Chamberlain. But by the time he got there, he meted off troops chasing wagon parks, skirmishers, whatever. By the time Oates got to 15th Alabama in front of 20th Maine, they were about even, 1-1. And I have that covered in the book. And I have the exercise that I went through to prove that. But Oates probably could have done a better job of keeping his group together. But he was on the flank, and he was attracted to some things, saw a wagon park coming down off Big Round Top and sent off 40 troops to go check it out. Of course, what could 40 troops do with a wagon park? They weren't bringing anything back. They weren't capturing it. It's not enough to do anything. So they were lost. Oh, and then to mention his 22-man canteen team that before they even jumped off Warfield Ridge, sent them off to get water because they had no water most of the day. And they were captured by the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters before they could get back to him on Big Round Top on his way to attack Chamberlain. So lots of people.
So I want to go back now to the 140th New York and Patty O'Rourke. Talk about that unit coming up over the ridgeline and entering the fray.
Weed's brigade was moving west on Wheatfield Road to support the activity going on around the Trossel farmstead with Sickles' 3rd Corps. As that unit was moving down Wheatfield Road, Warren spied them, and he saw the head of the column, and he knew he still needed more troops. So this was the only time while Warren was on Little Round Top that he jumped on his horse and ran down to Wheatfield Road. And by the time he got down there, he caught the last regiment, which was Patty O'Rourke at 140th New York. Some people say it was the first. No, it was the last, because the lineup that Weed had for his group. Warren knew Patty O'Rourke real well. And he said, hey, I need a regiment. Can we get him up here post haste? And Patty said, hey, I'm under orders. I got to follow, where we're going. Warren said, look, I'll take care of that. I need you to get up there. So Warren had Roebling take Patty O'Rourke up to Little Round Top to the spot where he needed him. And Warren kept going on down Wheatfield Road to catch up to Weed, to tell him what he did, and eventually got Weed's whole brigade turned around and coming back up to Little Round Top. Roebling, as he was taking up Patty O'Rourke's 140th New York, these Rochester racehorses, these guys are all from Rochester, great place, Kodak and all that stuff. Of course, Kodak wasn't there at that time. So as they were getting near the top of the mountain, Hazlitt's artillery got in their way. There was people still trying to get artillery on top of Little Round Top. They did get some guns up there, but not till after all the fighting was done. There are 4 cannons sitting on top of Little Round Top. They were not there during the combat. Not a good artillery platform. Not enough room. There's certain space you need to be able to work the guns. They didn't have that. Plus, they were 10-pound Parrots, which are solid shot. Couldn't even do anything against anti-personnel. Plus, the only thing they could do is throw some rounds over toward Devil's Den and Houck Ridge. Anyway, the artillery line broke up 140th New York except for 2 companies. They got through with O'Rourke leading them. Roebling got them up to the top of the hill and basically said, down there's where we need you. Patty O'Rourke took the 2 companies, about 100 men, and headed down the hill and caught the 48th Alabama and the 4th Texas just as they were about ready to break that refused flank of the 16th Michigan. Just caught them right in mid-stride. Did not have time to load their weapons. Did not have time to put their bayonets on. Just rugby scrummed right into them and pushed them off of the hill. In the process, Patty O'Rourke being in front of the group and leading his men was killed instantly around from probably the 48th Alabama because they were the group out on the end. But the unit did not hesitate. They kept moving on through. A guy by the name of Porter Farley, who was Norton's equivalent writing the history of the 140th New York. You got to read his story. Porter Farley, very highly educated person after the war. Farley's description of this is outstanding. But again, command issues within the Union Army. This was a microcosm of the example that Vincent had in his brigade. This happened in 140th New York because their other commanders instantly took over and they went on through. Without that movement and a literally nick of time action, that battle might have taken a little bit of a turn for a while, but not for too long. The Confederates might have broken through that flank and been there for a little while, but there were too many Union troops too close by. Plus, the rest of O'Rourke's 140th New York, about another 900 guys were coming, or not 900, about another 400 guys were coming up past the artillery, and they would have been in there within about 5 or 10 minutes. But fascinating story to read about Patty coming over the hill waving his sword. And unfortunately, good man, born in Ireland, top of his class at West Point, just a great guy.
We've been speaking with Joseph Michael Boslet. He is the author of Little Round Top at Gettysburg, a reassessment of July 2nd, 1863. Joe, thanks for joining me.
Phil, thank you so much.
Listeners like you make PCN programming possible. Full episodes of PA Books, as well as other PCN programs, are available to stream with the PCN Select app. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit pcntv.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.